Hello, and welcome to our series, Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. I'm Russell Robinson, Chief Executive Officer of Jewish National Fund USA. The time has come to be the voice of what Zionism really is. We're exposing the beautiful and diverse facets and facts of Zionism. Join me on this journey, together with Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. This is Zionism. My guest today is Alex Ryvchin, Co-Chief Executive Officer of the Executive Council of Australian Jewry and the author of two internationally acclaimed books on the history and politics, The Anti-Israel Agenda Inside the Political War on the Jewish State, and Zionism, The Concise History. Alex was born in the Ukraine, and his family left the former Soviet Union as refugees to Australia in 1987 when he was 3. Today, he writes for leading publications and speaks, debates, and teaches across the world on the Arab-Israeli conflict, foreign and national affairs, anti-Semitism, Holocaust, and has a new book in the works. Please welcome Alex Ryvchin. Alex, welcome to ZTV, to our Zionist studio, to our conversation on Zionism. And, you know, a writer of the Concise History of Zionism is the perfect guest for us today. Why did you write that book?
Well, it occurred to me that there's a lot of very good books about the history of the Jewish people, about the history of the State of Israel, but none that actually cover in a narrative fashion, in a readable way, the story of Zionism. And obviously the story of Zionism touches on Israeli history and Jewish history, but it's a story also entirely of its own, and it deserves its own telling. And it occurred to me also that the word Zionism, the mere mention of the word Zionism, has become so demonized, so trashed, so mischaracterized, as to become a word of curse and infamy. And it seemed to me that the best way to debunk the lies leveled against Zionism, the best way to reclaim the term Zionism, was to tell the story of Zionism in a way that was simple, clear, and honest, and I feel this book did that.
I felt your book, and I'm sending it out to everybody, and on this show we're going to be marketing it as well. When did we lose the narrative? Here is this beautiful word, Zionism, the return to our ancestral soil. When did we as a people start losing it, and what should we do to regain it?
You know, it occurs, it's like the fall of the Roman Empire. It occurs very slowly and yet all at once. And we see over a long period of time the demonization of certain concepts, the recategorization of certain terms. And we can point to major flashpoints like the General Assembly of the United Nations on the 10th of November 1975, deeming Zionism to be a form of racism, something so ludicrous and absurd that the Soviet Union that inserted Zionism as a form of racism knew that it was a joke. They knew it was a farce, but it took off. And a lie repeated often enough becomes laundered into truth. And we've seen it come from the United Nations and then into university campuses and to the reports of politicized NGOs like Amnesty and Oxfam. And the sorts of things that were unthinkable 10, 20 years ago, the notion that Israel was an apartheid state, it was a slur that was so absurd and ridiculous as to hold no merit or strength whatsoever, has now become commonplace. So it happens through incremental steps and the repetition of lies by people of influence and in influential forums. And the way to fight this is to fight it in the same way that it's happening, to go into those places, to stand up, to articulate the case for Israel, to draw a red line and say no more. Because once we lose words like Zionism, which, like you said, is a beautiful concept that embodies everything about the Jewish people, our connection to land, our notion of peoplehood, our immutable rights, all of these things, once those things become attacked and redefined, the very things which they represent will be lost as well. So we have to stand up and we have to fight back.
So you've spoken about that 1967 Six-Day War, 1973 Yom Kippur War, 2 years later, the Zionism and racism resolution at the UN. Give us some chronological and strategic analysis as you have given to that happening and to us not answering it.
Well, as you said, it kind of begins with the Six-Day War, where Israel demonstrates its military might, where it's kind of revered amongst the world, and particularly amongst leftist movements, for being this plucky nation state standing up to much larger, much mightier foes. It was supported by communist parties throughout the world at that point in time. And then you have the Yom Kippur War in 1973, where again, Israel holds its ground in a bruising war. And shortly after that, the Palestinians are granted observer status at the United Nations. And this really marks the entry of the Palestinians onto the world stage. And they use that stage to effectively begin a new phase of the war on Israel. So what had originated as a war of destruction through military force, through invasion, and then moved on to the phase of terrorism, then entered the third phase being political warfare. And the passage of the Zionism as racism resolution, which was a long time in the making, people think it was kind of a bolt from the blue, but it had first been adopted by a women's conference in Mexico. Then there was a meeting of African nations that also adopted it. And it gives us some insight into how the anti-Israel movement works. It works in incremental steps and momentum. And it shows us that things which we might view as trivial and inconsequential, a women's conference in Mexico, a meeting of African nations, it builds that momentum and then it hits us extremely hard. And after the Zionism as racism resolution of the General Assembly in 75, again, it cascades down into campuses, into civil society, into governments. You have 4 British universities passing resolutions to expel their Jewish societies on the basis that they're Zionist and therefore racist. And slowly but surely, these notions take hold. And it shows us that we have to fight. We have to fight every canard, every lie, every slur leveled against our people, but we have to fight it effectively. I think one of the problems that we enter into regularly as a people, as leaders, is that we think that by condemning something, the mere act of condemnation will defeat it, it will rally people to our side. Often it's counterproductive, often it elevates the issue. We have to fight it, we have to fight it strategically and prudently, which often means working behind the scenes to defeat these things before they see the light of day.
As students who aren't necessarily Jewish, getting to go on Caravan for Democracy allows us to speak in a way to the nuance of Israel.
I'm going to talk about you as an individual, because I think that your background and the issues that we're facing today really brings it to light to everybody who may not even have known Ukraine before and Babi Yar. Tell your story, Alex, about what gives you even that personal responsibility and right to stand up and talk that way.
Well, my family is from Ukraine. My father is from a small town near Kharkiv, which again, most people probably never heard of, but has now become a flashpoint in this horrible war. My mother was born in Kiev. I was born there as well. And our family home before we left as Refuseniks and refugees in 1987 was a block away from Babi Yar. And being there at that time, you wander around Babi Yar and you would think it's any green space, any park in any city in the world. You would never understand, merely by looking at it, the depths of atrocity and human barbarity that took place there. The fact that 100,000 of our people are interred within that ground. And people happily walk on that ground and sip beers on the hillocks, oblivious to the horrors that transpired there. And I took my first steps as a boy on Babi Yar. So it's always been a part of who I am. And even though I left, my family migrated, like I said, in 87 when I was 3 years old, being from that place has really shaped my consciousness, my sense of self, my view of the world. And my parents and grandparents bestowed a great gift on me by telling me stories, telling me about where I came from, telling me about what it was like to be Jew in the Soviet Union. My mother would tell me stories about how she would ride the trolley bus to and from work each day. And as it would approach Babi Yar, there would always be one drunk, at least one drunk on this trolley bus, who would be in the stupor, asleep. And suddenly, as the conductor would call next stop Babi Yar, he would awaken and cry out and cackle and lament, if only they'd shot all the Jews here. You know, my father would tell me about in the town where he grew up, how there was a ravine, but it was completely flat. And he was a boy and he asked one of the old matriarchs of the town, he said, "Why do we call this place a ravine when it's completely flat?" And she said, "Ah, my dear boy, it was a ravine until we filled it with Jews." And so when you hear these stories, you know, of the cruelty, the injustice, being spat upon, being attacked, being mocked, opening the papers each day to read about ruthless cosmopolitans and the Zionist enemy and all of these things, it can't not affect you. And I think some people turn away from it because it's too horrific and want nothing to do with it. They think it's too burdensome. But for me, that would have been a colossal betrayal. And now being a citizen of a free country in the West and having the ability to stand up and articulate the case for Israel and defend the Jewish people, how could I not do that?
But so when was that moment for you? You know, you hear, because you raised the issue, a lot of people do look at the past and say, you know what, it's the past. Here you are, a young man, you're free. Your parents telling you the stories of the past, but you're free of that. What was that moment for you, Alex?
You know, there was one moment, and that's when I was at university during the time of the Second Intifada. I was studying law and politics in Sydney, in my hometown here, and it was Holocaust Remembrance Day. And I observed a group of Jewish students get together to mark the occasion solemnly, to light candles and say prayers. And then I see another group of students just nearby assemble and then unfurl a giant Palestinian flag. And this is on Yom HaShoah, and this is during the Second Intifada. And seeing that, I was appalled. And my mind immediately went back to all those stories of my parents and grandparents about the injustice and the indignity and the cruelty and the abuse. So I went over to the students and began to remonstrate with them and asked them what the hell they thought they were doing. And then I learned that one of them was himself a Jew, the grandson of a Holocaust survivor, no less. And seeing that pitiful Jew debase himself to please those who hate us, it really set me on my course. And I then carved out my own path of writing and of advocating and seeking out opportunities to stand up for our people. But I think that was the moment where I realized that, you know, those indignities that I may have thought had been left behind in the old country, in the Soviet Union, they're present in the West as well. And if we don't stand up, if we don't fight, if we don't defend ourselves, if we don't take pride in who we are as Jews, they'll fester and they'll enlarge.
So you talk a lot about not being an apologetic Jew, not being an apologetic Zionist. Kind of elaborate that on to us, especially to our audience, that so many people, it's, you know, we don't have to boast.
Well, look, I think one thing that anti-Semites have always done throughout time is to heap this sense of shame onto the Jewish people, make us ashamed of who we are, make us cower and make us fearful. You know, there's this great expression that the anti-Semite loves to accuse the Jew of stealing, not because he thinks he's stolen something, but because he likes to watch him turn out his pockets. That's how they like to treat us. That's how they like to view us. And so in defiance of that, I think we should be immensely proud of who we are. We should be proud that we belong to this numerically skilled people, this ancient people that by all rational reckoning should have ceased to exist centuries ago, survived every pogrom, every inquisition, every expulsion, every inferno, and we're here today as Jews. That alone should be a source of immense pride for our people, for any young Jew today. But then when you actually look at the story of Zionism and look at how that story unfolded, the fact that these leaders of the Zionist movement conceived of a movement that ingathered this exiled, scattered, you know, beleaguered people, rehabilitated them, revived the Hebrew language, restored them to their ancient lands, achieved something that has never been done in human history. That, again, should be an immense source of pride. And again, when you look at even deeper into Zionism and the concepts that it embodies, Jewish peoplehood, Jewish connection to land, Jewish indigeneity, all of these things, why wouldn't we be proud? And I pity any Jew who isn't proud. I think that, you know, a great source of Jews turning away from that story is not knowing the story to begin with. I think if more knew it and understood it intimately, they would take that pride in it. And those who know it and choose to turn away in spite of that, like I said, I have nothing but pity for them.
I'm Zoe, and I'm from Dream Israel, an incredible teen travel initiative at Jewish National Fund USA. Let me tell you what Dream Israel is. Through this initiative, any high school student can receive a grant of up to $7,500 to put towards their study abroad program in Israel with one of Jewish National Fund USA's academic partners. How do you earn this grant? All you need to do is fundraise for a Jewish National Fund USA philanthropic project in Israel.
Without this Dream Israel grant, I would not be able to be here in Israel.
Thank you, Dream Israel.
Thank you, Dream Israel.
Thank you, Dream Israel, for making my dreams come true.
Take the trip of your dreams with Dream Israel and Jewish National Fund USA.
So you speak all over the world. You speak to a lot of young people. What's your feeling about today and tomorrow? What do you think about that next generation? You've talked about Gen Z and how we have to attract Gen Z. It's one of the reasons for your book. It was to put it into that simple terms. What sort of things should we be doing in the organized Jewish world, and what should we do as individuals?
Well, again, it begins with knowing our story. And one thing that I've seen speaking to high school students and university students around the world is that there's a great deal of passion there. And I think, we fret as parents and as communal leaders that, because young people today didn't grow up with those seminal moments of modern Jewish history, the Holocaust and the survival of the Jewish people through that inferno is ancient history to them. The foundation of the Jewish state, the Six-Day War, the raid on Entebbe, all of these things are totally abstract to them. And so we're concerned that they don't get it. They don't feel it the way that you and I do, Russell. But I think, from my conversations with young people, they have that passion. And once you have that passion and that pride and the love of the Jewish people, you will seek out that knowledge. And from the knowledge will come the arguments, will come the sturdy, intellectual, robust side that will then see you through. So firstly, I don't think we should be too pessimistic. I think that passion remains. But passion alone is a tempestuous sort of thing. It can be manipulated in different directions. So without knowledge and education, that passion is kind of pointless in a way. So we need to instill that knowledge, and it's got to be real knowledge. I mean, I'm forever being asked for talking points about how to rebut this slur and that argument. I don't believe in talking points. I believe in knowing the facts and the history. And so I think that, as you said, the reason why I wrote the book, or one of the reasons, is to give young people something which they can read in a week, in a couple of weeks, and enjoy, that tells the story of the 4,000-year history of our people, the miraculous story of the survival and redemption of our people. And I think that will match that passion with the knowledge. And from there, I think they will go on to be proud as Jews and to advocate for the Jewish people.
You see, I agree with you. I'm not pessimistic about the future. I happen to think that there is so many young people out there that you have to start with the desire to want to know. And so many times we're not giving them, and that's why I loved your book, because it's the desire to want to know is that we don't have to educate the A to Z to through the entire encyclopedia day one, but give them some of the facts. You're young, you're out there. Give me some other things that young people, I'm going to take a quote. You talked in one of your talks about, I think it was Philippe Petit, when he crossed the World Trade Center. He said, they asked him why. He said, because I could and I had to. So you're a young person, you have to. Tell young people how they have to.
You're right. I find it remarkable that you remembered that. That was from one of my earliest speeches when I launched my first book. So thank you for remembering that. And you're right. He was asked, why did you do this? When he crossed between the Twin Towers on a high wire, and he said, there is no why. And for me, I get asked that question, why do you do this? And there is no why. It's something so inherent and inborn. And I want it to be inherent and inborn for every Jew. And again, the way that that's achieved, I believe, is not only through the formal education that we've spoken about and the knowledge building, but through the storytelling. You asked also what we can do as individuals. Talk to your children from a young age. Tell them, about the joys of being a Jew, the pride that we take in being a Jew, the miracle of being a Jew. Jewish history is replete with stories of extraordinary circumstances, geniuses, survival. Let them know that story and live it and feel like they're a part of that continuing evolution, the unfolding of the story of the Jewish people. I think also, when I look back at the history of Zionism, the early leaders, people like Chaim Weizmann, people like Leon Pinsker, they were so passionate about it. They viewed Zionism as a radical idea, and they threw themselves into debates, raucous debates at all hours of the night, and writing and arguing and proving and community organizing. And Zionism kind of grew from that. The Zionist Congress came from that sort of grassroots organizing. And today, the reality is that, Zionism in many respects has been accomplished through the creation of the State of Israel, and people view it as no longer radical. And again, I think if our young people understood how radical an idea it was then and how radical it remains, the fact that we live in a time of Israel, which in the span of human history is a minute thing. I mean, for the majority of our history as a people, we've been a people stateless, scattered, powerless, and to live in a golden age for the Jewish people is a remarkable thing. And I think that will give them, again, that drive, that passion, and that quest for knowledge.
I'm going to take you now to leadership, because I think Zionism is part of the story, but it's leaders who are willing to stand up. It's not been easy to be a leader, to be a writer, to be writing these kind of books where you could, your capabilities can be to write the great books of the world, but you've taken on this as a leader. Leadership is hard. Help some young people out there. Why is it important?
Look, again, when you look at the history of the Jewish people, we've been blessed always with great leaders, leaders that have had vision and have made sacrifices. When you go back to biblical times, David and Moses, and to more modern times in the story of Zionism, again, you had people like Herzl, who had his own characteristics, who was absolutely ceaseless, tireless in his diplomacy. When he fixed his mind on something, he accomplished it. He worked with unrelenting vigor. No task was too small for him. When he was organizing the first Zionist Congress in Basel in 1897, he attended to every single detail of that Congress. He sat up with students in the late hours of the night, licking envelopes, to send out invitations. And I take inspiration from that, as much as when I look at the diplomacy and the deliberations of Ryvchin in 1939, before the white paper, I learned from the mistakes that were made by the Jewish people, by the Jewish leaders. We're not without fault. But leadership is vital, and to be able to inspire people to make strategic decisions, to slowly, reorientate the course of organizations and communities and the Jewish people, that has a tremendous impact down the track. And look, I think, there's challenges to leadership. It's a great burden often to be leader of the Jewish people or of the Jewish community, to take that upon yourself. But the rewards are immense because you become an active player in the greatest story in history. So I encourage every young person to seek that out, to seek out the opportunity to lead. But also, one thing which I've observed with kind of this generation, maybe I'm showing my age here, but the younger people emerging behind me, I think they want everything immediately. And things take time. It takes time to build knowledge. It takes time to acquire the skills to inspire people to make correct decisions. So absorb as much as you can, be patient, surround yourself with the finest leaders, because in the Jewish world, there are wonderful leaders. Russell, you're an exemplar of that. And learn and absorb, and then take the opportunity when it arises. Say yes. One of the things that has taken me to where I am today is that I said yes very many times, the small things to arduous tasks. I kind of live by the philosophy of Teddy Roosevelt, whose bust is on the shelf behind me. He said that when he's asked to do something, first he says yes, and then he works out how to do it. So take that responsibility upon yourself, say yes, and step up to the mantle of leadership.
So you've written books about the Arab-Israeli conflict. You've written books about the anti-Israel and articles. I'm going to take you there for the last part of our program. I don't like to, I learned from a person we had on the show, Scott Shea, not to use the word anti-Semitism. I like to use anti-Jew. Is the anti-Israel movement an anti-Jewish movement? You're in Australia. I'm in the United States. Israel is there. I can still be a Zionist, but, they could talk anti-Israel, but what does it do to me in Australia, me in the United States? And is it an anti-Jewish movement?
It's a very good question in the way that you framed it, and I think it's necessary to ask that. When they call a country on the edge of the Mediterranean Sea an apartheid state, what does it mean for you and me in the cities where we are in the West? And apart from hurting us emotionally, because we view this rightly as a familiar attack on the rights and the dignities of the Jewish people, whereas in the past it was leveled at the Jewish faith or Jewish community or the Jews as a race, now it's leveled at the Jewish state, and we recognize that, and we're right to. But also there's a direct attack there on Jewish communities in the West. We're not impervious to this. And when you see the thrust of the anti-Israel movement, it's based on demonizing Jews in the West. One of Yasser Arafat's henchmen in the 1970s, a guy called Abu Iyad, he said that the way to achieve the downfall of Zionism is to demonize Israel in the West, to diminish the support for Israel amongst the Western world, and then the defeat of Zionism will be just a matter of time. So the strategy is to turn Western countries like ours against Israel and against Zionism, also turn Jews against Jews. And the theory is that Israel will become so isolated it won't be able to defend itself or its interests, and it will crumble as a state. So, and we see in Western countries attacks on the Jewish lobby, attacks on the obscene, grotesque power of the Jews over government. So in that regard, we see direct attacks on the Jewish community. And a deliberate aim to diminish our ability to advocate, to speak up for the things that we hold dear. I think it's extraordinary that, every community group, every people, every religion is given a right to speak up for themselves, to define what racism against that group looks like. But only when the Jews seek to do it is it something underhanded and nefarious. We see with, for example, the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, it's recharacterized as some Jewish plot to shield Israel from criticism. Only my community organization is called a sinister lobby. But when the Chinese or the Russian or any other community in the country speaks up for the things they care about, they're just Australians speaking up on issues that concern them. With us, it's something dark and sinister. So that embeds anti-Semitic prejudices in our country, and it serves to weaken Israel as well. And that's why we in the diaspora have a duty to stand up to that. Let Israel take care of its military defense, and we should take care of its defense in other regards in the political sphere in the countries where we live. That's our duty.
So give me a concise phrase, Zionism. I'm out there, I'm asking you, Alex, define Zionism to me.
Well, you can define it simply as the support for the right of the Jewish people to exercise national self-determination in some part of their ancient homeland. That's simple Zionism. But that to me is totally inadequate in actually representing what it is and why it's so important, why it's intrinsic to who we are as a people. Because the two fundamental components of Zionism to me are Jewish peoplehood, the notion that we're not merely a religious group, that we're a nation with national rights, and that we're indigenous to those lands, the connection to that land. And when you understand Zionism in those terms, then you view it as an organic, irrepressible expression of those rights. So that's Zionism to me. It's the whole of the Jewish people, it's Jewish civilization, Jewish peoplehood, which is a beautiful thing.
So Alex, from a young person born blocks from Babi Yar to Australia, to speaking out for our people, don't quit saying yes. We need you. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for guiding us. Thank you for giving us the words to lead us.
Thank you, Russell. Thank you for everything that you do and for the inspiration you provide to people like me and leaders around the world. Thank you, Russell.
To watch this and all of our past episodes, go to ZTV, our Zionism Studios YouTube page, and subscribe to get notifications.